Greetings and salutations. This is Mama Ru. You're listening to Mama Ru's Ancestral Musings, a podcast about all things Blackness from an ancestral point of view. This is take 2 of part 1 of my podcast on divination. I recorded it earlier and posted it and went back to listen, and I sounded like I was sucking on helium. No good. I don't know what's going on. Some glitch in the software, perhaps. But anyway, let me get right into it. Okay? Now, divination is what? It is a practice of being able to utilize certain tools, spiritual gifts, to divine. That is to seek clarity, answers, and insight from the spirits, basically, okay, using different tools. Now, some people can divine without using any tools at all, okay? Lots of people have that gift. I can divine without tools myself, but I choose to use tools. Why? Because I'm a sensory person, right? I like being able to see things and move things around with my hands, and I love images and imagery and all that. And I was drawn to cartomancy, that's the art of divination using cards, at a very young age. I was about maybe 9 or 10 or so when I first saw a tarot deck and fell in love with it. And I've been with tarot decks, over the years, many. And it's my preferred method of choice when it comes to divination. Now, most old school workers who do use cards tend to use regular bicycle playing cards. Just regular cards that you would use to play spades and poker and bidwits and everything else. I do know a couple of people who read playing cards in the tradition, and they do it very well. And I myself am learning, okay? But I prefer the tarot. And the tarot that I learned with first is the Rider-Waite. Now, there are books out there. A lot of decks come with books. But I did not learn everything about the tarot through books. Okay? I caught hell trying to do it that way. And my mother basically advised that I get rid of the book and just go with whatever was in my gut. The first impressions that I felt from the card would be the right answer. And so I call myself an intuitive reader because I read intuitively. Okay, so tarot deck is a great deck. The Rider-Waite Tarot, anyway, is a great starter deck for people learning the art of cartomancy. I have several other decks that I use. One is called the Cartouche. It isn't a tarot. It's an oracle deck, and it's based on Egyptian symbolism. Now, I am not a practitioner of Kemet, nor am I studied in Egyptology. Don't really have a desire to do that at the moment, but the Egyptian cartouche really spoke to me when I first saw that a long time ago. And it's no longer in print, but the decks and books are still available, used usually. And they command a kind of a hefty price, but if you're lucky and are able to get a hold of one, I urge that you do so. It's an incredible deck. Other decks that I use are the Aleister Crowley Thoth Tarot. Now, I know what you're probably thinking. Not a big fan of Crowley myself, okay? I am not. But I do like that deck, particularly for readings dealing with love and money. I don't know why that is. Maybe because, Crowley himself was real big on greed and lust. I don't know. Maybe that's why that particular deck is so well suited for those readings in my experience. Another deck that I use, but not that often, is the Lenormand. And the Lenormand is not like the tarot. It's probably closest to actual playing cards, okay? It's a very interesting deck. I didn't really mesh with that deck at first. And even now, after having it for a couple of years, it's still kind of, I don't know, it's a little flaky. Sometimes it'll read for me really well, and then other days I just can't make heads or tails out of it. But whenever I move to use it, I will use it, and most times it gives me a good reading. But my go-to decks these days tend to be the Cartouche and the tarot decks that I have. And if you can learn cartomancy with regular playing cards, I think that's also very, very good. Other forms of divination that I use is I have a pendulum. And the most ubiquitous pendulums out there tend to be gemstones on chains, or other types of, threads or whatever. And they're fine. They're very beautiful for the most part. A pendulum can be made from anything with weight, okay, on a string, on a chain, or what have you. Cords even. And some folks use rings, pieces of jewelry, and just hang them on a chain and can get it to work that way. I'm very partial to my root. The type of root that I use is called Queen Elizabeth root. Okay, that's how the old folks called it. Some people think of it as the counterpart to High John the Conqueror root. I'm not 100% on that. I don't know if I agree with that wholeheartedly, but yeah, that's how people tend to speak of Queen Elizabeth root. But the root that I have is dried, and I bored a hole at the top and ran a piece of crochet thread through it and tied it. And it's at a decent length, and it hangs nicely and it moves wonderfully. Pendulums are great for answering yes or no type questions, okay? But you can elicit more detailed information with the pendulum by dowsing over a spirit board. And the most common spirit board known to most people is the Ouija board. And there's a lot of controversy surrounding the good old Ouija board. I don't really buy into all of that. But I find that creating my own is just as useful. And how do I do that? Well, I get a Sharpie and a piece of paper, regular old printer paper, and I write out the alphabet and the numbers 0 through 9. And I hold the pendulum over each letter and see which letter it'll actually start to swing over, and that's a positive hit. So you just go and record all of the letters that you got a positive hit on, if you're looking for names or words or anything like that. And what I find very interesting about that is when I'm holding it over a letter that isn't specified, it doesn't move, and you can feel the tension. It's almost like by the default, it wants to swing over every letter, but if it isn't the proper letter, then it won't swing, and you can feel sort of like that force, some force is there to keep it from actually swinging over a letter if it is not the right letter. And I just find it very fascinating. And one way that I was able to use it like that was when I was working with a crystal ball or crystal sphere, however you want to call them. I'd never used one of those before, and I was just very curious, about having one and using one, and I never really could get much from the crystal ball. And one day, I just said, okay, I'll give it one more shot, and if I still can't get anything from it, I'll just leave it alone. And it was on that day that I actually started to see images in it. And I saw the image of a woman who looked like she was Indian. She was wearing a sari, and she had a bindi on her forehead. And so I immediately felt like, this is possibly an ancestor on my father's side. And so I went ahead and got the board out and my pendulum and started to ask questions. And I basically wanted to know the name of this ancestor. And the name was spelled out. And I went ahead and Googled the name out of curiosity just to see, if it had a meaning, if it did correspond, with the culture of my father. And it did. It turned out that this was a common girl's name in a certain region of India. Okay, one that I wasn't familiar with in terms of my father's family. I don't know a whole lot about my father's family anyway, and he's passed on now, so I can't really get, a lot of that information confirmed. But it was really very, just so interesting. And I asked, was this in fact a bloodline ancestor from my father's side? And the answer I got was yes. Okay. And the region that I was able to associate that with is, like I said, a region that was not known to me, with regard to where I know my father and his family to be from. So I did some history, research on that area. And it turned out that, the people in the area had a very interesting practice of sorcery and magic and all like that. So that was very interesting. And I plan on doing more research on that in time. Right now I'm still, all up in my Congo African research. And, once I'm done with that, then I'll go ahead and start researching the other side of my bloodline. So yeah. Pendulum dowsing is a great way to get insight and answers to questions. Another form of divination that I like is using a bowl of water to which I add drops of oil. Okay, I don't know the proper terminology for that type of divination, if it even is one out there. I'm not sure. Okay, but I basically do that type of divination in matters of people being crossed up. And what it does is I have this oil called Black Destroyer oil. And it's a very old oil. I bought that bottle of oil probably in the 80s or the 90s. I mean, it's very old. Okay, the big bottle is very old. And I rarely used it because it's Black Destroyer oil. Never really had much use for that. But I would take a drop of it and put it in a bowl of water. The water that had been, previously blessed and prayed over. And the drops would behave a certain way to indicate the status of a situation of, one being crossed up. So the different behaviors in the drop of oil could be indicative of the current situation, like whether or not the drop of oil maintained a shape in the water, whether or not it's split up into several other smaller drops in the water, whether or not it dissipated and didn't come back together again, or if it dissipated and then reformed into, a round drop again. All those things are indicative to different situations, such as, there are cross conditions, or they're not, okay? Or there were, but they've been taken care of, or there were, and attempts have been made to take care of them, but more needs to be done. So all of that can be, elucidated with the oil and the water. Another oil that I've used before in the same manner is fake olive oil. What is fake olive oil, you ask? Most of the popular brands that come from Italy on our grocery shelves these days are counterfeit olive oil. Okay, there were some stories that were put out sometime last year, I think, about how the Italian mafia basically shut down all of the olive oil production over in Italy and started making counterfeit olive oil. Okay, where they would take soybean oil or other types of, oil and put green dye in them. So if you get like extra virgin Bertolli, for example, it's really, really dark green. And don't use it for your cooking. Okay, for other purposes, it's fine. But for culinary, probably not so much. Okay, it's got artificial coloring and artificial flavoring associated with it. Now, why would they do something like that? That's just so terrible, isn't it? That's bad. Especially if you like olive oil and cooking like I do. Go with Greek Mediterranean olive oil. It costs a little bit more, but if you're into olive oil in your food and your cooking, go with Greek. You can't go wrong. So anyway, yeah, oil drops in water are great for, looking at crossed up situations. Another form of divination that I like is bibliomancy. Okay, and a lot of folks think that that word implies that you use the Bible to